Portugal, Spain, well, they'll let them in.
Okay, Philip, I think we're at a good number now. We've got majority of people in and no more people joining. So let's start. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this evening. We're delighted to have Vice Admiral Sir Adrian Johns with us this evening. Just a few housekeeping rules before I pass over to Philip, our CEO. As usual, we've muted you all upon entry, so feel free later on. We will have a Q&A section, and if you would like to take yourself off mute to pose a question when we come round to you, then by all means do, or you can pop your question in the chat bar. Without further ado, Philip, over to you.
Thank you, Lucia. Good evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining our Friends of the British Overseas Territories Gibraltar themed event this evening. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest this evening, Sir Adrian Johns, CBE. It's Adrian, just to give you a bit of background on Vice Admiral Sir Adrian's illustrious career. After graduating from Imperial College, he served for 35 years in the Royal Navy, specialising as a helicopter pilot and flying instructor, but also commanding 5 times at sea in a variety of ships, ranging from a minesweeper to HMS Ocean. Then Sir Adrian also commanded Britain's largest warship. He was head of the Fleet Air Arm for 5 years and retired from the Navy as Second Sea Lord and Commander-in-Chief Naval Home Command in 2008. Sir Adrian was subsequently appointed as Governor and Commander-in-Chief of Gibraltar from 2009, serving as Governor until 2013. Following his second retirement, he is now a member of the Senior Salaries Review Body and a non-executive member of the Civil Service Pensions Board. Sir Adrian is a Deputy Lieutenant of Greater London, and amongst a variety of other charitable interests is Chairman of the Friends of Gibraltar, a Trustee and Deputy Chairman of the Greenwich Foundation, as well as a patron of a number of veteran associations. So we're very lucky to have Sir Adrian with us this evening, who's going to talk about his role as a governor, but he will also, I believe, touch on the COVID situation in Gibraltar and also the EU exit situation. So on that note, I will ask Sir Adrian to kindly unmute himself and welcome.
Philip, thank you very much indeed for that introduction, and good evening, everybody. Very nice to see so many people here. I've had a look down the participants list and there are some names I recognise down there, so it's good to see you here too. As Philip says, I'm going to talk a little bit about my time in Gibraltar, my role and my experience as governor. And I want to look back at the 4 years I spent there, but things have changed markedly since I left in 2013. So I don't follow the day-to-day progress in Gibraltar, but we do get updates. Before I do anything else or say anything else, one of the key lessons I learned in Gibraltar was to avoid politics, to be unfailingly careful with what I said in any environment, and to avoid straying into the political arena. And I think I'm right in saying it was former US President Ronald Reagan who once said that politics was supposed to be the second oldest profession in the world, but that he'd come to realize that it bore a very close resemblance to the first. Anyway, I need to get the balance right. And I think that pretty much sums up the governor's role. Trying to walk a tightrope between, on the one side, shark-infested waters, and on the other, some sort of minefield or other. But a little bit more of that in a moment. Perhaps first a few words about how I came to be appointed in Gibraltar. Well, as Philip has said in the introduction, I retired from the Navy in 2008, settled back to our home in South London, and was thinking about what I was going to do next. And I was having quite a good time doing a little bit of job hunting and seeing headhunters and goodnesses what else. And I got a phone call out of the blue from the Naval Secretary, and he's the chap who used to appoint, or still does, appoint all the senior officers in the Navy. And he said, did I have a job? And I said, no, but I've got 1 or 2 irons in the fire. He said, well, have you thought about being a governor? Because there's a couple, 2 or 3 governorships coming up in the next year or so. And I said, no, I hadn't thought about that, but throw my name in the hat and that'll be fine. And 5 months went by and I'd heard absolutely nothing at all. And then I got a phone call from the Foreign Office asking me to come in for a talk. And I said, well, okay, I will, but what is it about? And the answer was Gibraltar. And I duly found out that the talk was in fact a final interview. I didn't have any idea that I'd been shortlisted for it. There were 3 others in the pipeline as well, and I don't know who they were, but I know that I was very much the lucky one. I think very interestingly, today the process is very different indeed. It's an open competition, it's advertised, it could be absolutely anyone who goes to be the governor. So far we've had recently certainly former military, former Navy people, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that's a very interesting thing. And especially when the interview process today is very, very much more rigorous and objective than the one I went through. And I'm rather glad about that, because I don't think, I'm not sure I'd be here if I'd gone through that process. Anyway, it didn't take my wife Susie and I very long to decide that actually this was a fantastic opportunity and that we should take it. So having packed all my uniform away into the loft, thinking I'd never need to use it again, out it came into the packing cases and off we went to Gibraltar. Our grown-up children, you know, were also absolutely thrilled to hear about the appointment, though I'm ashamed to say each one of them went straight for Google Maps to find out where Gibraltar was. And I think that's something about the way we've educated them. Well, although it wasn't the most rigorous of interviews, I guess the Foreign Office must have reckoned that I possessed some form of rudimentary diplomatic skills, otherwise they wouldn't have, I guess, offered me the appointment. Though I think they would probably have thought twice had they known of my earlier encounter with a Spanish diplomat in Canada, of all places. Now, at the time I was commanding HMS Campbelltown, a frigate, and we were the NATO flagship in the North Atlantic. And we were on a visit to Halifax in Nova Scotia. Now, outboard of, because we were the flagship, we were alongside the jetty, and outboard of my ship was a Spanish frigate. And we got on very well indeed. Now, the Spanish captain had invited the Spanish ambassador to Canada to lunch on the Sunday. So I thought I'd better turn out to meet the ambassador at the gangway, escort him across my ship to the Spanish ship next door. Well, the ambassador duly arrived, and we took him on board with all the normal naval bells and whistles and things. And we crossed across my flight deck of the Royal Navy frigate and towards the Spanish ship. And he said to me, he said, you know, Captain, he said, I've never walked across British sovereign territory to get to Spain before. And I said, oh, well, Ambassador, you've never been to Gibraltar. And a smile disappeared from his face. And I realized I put my foot in it big time. And never did I think that I would be in the middle of the Spain, Gibraltar, UK triangle that I found myself in 2009. And that's where we went, 26th of October, 2009. And then we arrived with great pomp and ceremony. It was a fantastic day. We arrived in HMS Lancaster, with bands playing and saluting guns firing, red carpets laid out, and it was a fantastic experience. I think that Gibraltar was, and probably still is, very keen on this manifestation of, if I can put it like this, vice-regal ceremony, but I don't suppose the FCO is quite so enthusiastic. Now, what about the governor's role? I think I had prepared myself pretty well for it, but it wasn't quite as straightforward as I perhaps had naively imagined. And I was given bad advice. I was given bad advice by a friend of mine who had recently retired as the Lieutenant Governor of Guernsey, where I think life is a little quieter and certainly quieter on the political front. And he described to me his job like it was like being the commander-in-chief fleet 100 years ago, but without the fleet, i.e. all of the perks and none of the responsibilities. And he told me that if he received 2 letters in a day, he saved 1 for after lunch, so he'd have something to do in the afternoon. But of course, he was only a lieutenant governor and charged mainly with ceremonial and representational duties. And Gibraltar is quite different. Ceremonial and representational matters are very important, but I found there was quite a bit more to the job than just that. And the governor is not, as some would like to think, the Foreign Office's agent in Gibraltar. He is in fact the Queen's representative, constitutionally the senior officer of Her Majesty's government of Gibraltar, and with a role clearly defined by the Constitution. So I represented Her Majesty and not Her Majesty's government. I was very clear about that. But it got me into seriously hot water with a particular minister in the FCO, which really very nearly led to a crisis. He believed, I think, that he was able to instruct the governor as he would instruct an ambassador, and I didn't think that that was the way it worked. And so we rather fell out. But fortunately, the general election of 2010 removed the problem at a stroke. The government changed. So I lived to fight another day. Now, the constitutional position, the Gibraltar Constitution charges the governor with special responsibility for external affairs, defence, and internal security. And so my main interlocutors in London were the FCO on one hand and the Ministry of Defence, the MOD, on the other. And it's in these great departments of state where foreign and defence policy are made. Now, the essence of the governor's job, as I saw it, was on the one hand to communicate the UK's policies to Her Majesty's government of Gibraltar, and on the other hand, to influence the formulation of UK policy by representing the interests of Gibraltar to the UK. And this I thought was very important because, you know, although Gibraltar is the closest of all the overseas territories to London, it's still 1,000 miles away and almost out of sight and out of mind. And I found very quickly that not necessarily in the Foreign Office where they were focused on Gibraltar in the Iberia office, but in other departments of state, if we had to make communication there, they just didn't see Gibraltar. And what I wanted to do was put a little sign on everyone's wall saying, remember Gibraltar, because formulation of policy for the United Kingdom and judgments made there very often had some sort of impact for Gibraltar as well. So that 1,000-mile gap could be awfully wide at times. What about our relationship with the UK? Well, I think Gibraltar's relationship with the United Kingdom is of fundamental importance. Always has been, but today probably more than ever. And in a sense, Brexit, EU exit, and subsequently COVID, the pandemic, have brought Gibraltar and the UK much closer together than they've been for a very long time indeed. But there's always been tension in the relationship, I think, and much of it has been caused as a result of the UK's relationship with Spain and the reaction of Spain to events in and around Gibraltar. And Gibraltarians remain passionately British, but I would say vehemently anti-colonial. Gibraltarians are not of Anglo-Saxon generally descent, but are Mediterranean. And they are proud British Gibraltarians, and the Queen is their Queen. There has been, I think, an historic mistrust of the FCO's intentions, and not without cause, actually. And many will remember the joint sovereignty debacle in 2002, when Peter Hain and Jack Straw conjured up a plan for joint sovereignty without consultation. And it all went very, very badly wrong. And to some extent, the tone changed with, and I'm trying to avoid politics here, but the tone changed when we moved from a Labour to a Conservative government. My personal impression was that the Labour government always looked at the overseas territories as anachronisms and liabilities, where one of the first things that William Hague said when he came in as Foreign Secretary in a Conservative government was that he saw the overseas territories as an asset, as assets. And that changed, I think, the way we dealt with the FCO. Well, what about the relationship with Spain? I didn't deal with Spain directly. The FCO dealt with Spain, and I dealt through the FCO to put my views in there. But our relationship, the overall relationship with Spain, was very dependent on the color of the government in Madrid. And during my time, it was all the PP, a very right-wing party, rampantly and aggressively critical and hostile to anything that Gibraltar did that indicated anything other than there being a subservient colony of the UK, which are clearly they weren't. And in the past, and certainly during my time, I think relations with the FCO were often tense because of this. There were many issues rolling around for us potentially to fall out about, but perhaps the one that coloured my time most was issues about the waters around Gibraltar. And I should say right away that most territories, most countries with a coastline claim territorial waters out to a distance of 12 miles. For some historic, archaic reason, there are only 3 miles in Gibraltar. Interestingly, Spain claims 12 miles around their enclaves in Ceuta and Melilla. So there is a doubt, and the doubt, in my view, arose between the 3 miles that the UK claims for Gibraltar and the 12 miles that normally would be territorial waters. So the UK regarded everything outside of 3 miles, between 3 and 12, as the high seas, but Spain regarded them as her territorial waters. And there were all sorts of issues that arose because of that. There were constant incursions during my time, constant provocation and testing. We had fishermen coming in, which I think was not the biggest problem we had. Fishermen have always fished in, Spanish fishermen have always fished in Gibraltar waters. We had incursions by the local Guardia Civil, never quite clear whether they were orchestrated. Sometimes they were, but most often it was just adventurism on the part of the Guardia Civil. And occasionally we had more serious incursions by the Spanish Navy, and serious because this was a state action rather than local adventurism. So the incursions were testing, they were irksome, they were very tedious, but every incursion by a Spanish vessel, the Guardia Civil or the Navy, had to be challenged and protested, otherwise a precedent might be set. And it got quite heated at times. There were formal diplomatic protests put in almost continuously. Ambassadors were called in from time to time. But unfortunately, I think the FCO were quite slow in the process of protesting. And when there was something that was perhaps on a borderline, very often we would see the Spain getting their protest in within 24 hours, and it was taking days and days, if not weeks, for the FCO to generate the same sort of thing. The fishermen believed they had a right to fish in Gibraltar waters, and I think there was some reasonable claim for grandfather rights to fishing. None of that was the real issue. And it was more the state incursion that I think caused us more problems than anything. The relationship with the armed forces, my relationship. I was nominally the commander-in-chief. I was certainly the commander-in-chief of the Royal Gibraltar Regiment, which was a great honour and a privilege. And of course, Gibraltar's enjoyed the strongest of relationships with the British Armed Forces for, well, more than 3 centuries. And Gibraltar's been a really important part, a strategic part of the UK's defence jigsaw for most of that time. Now, if you look back 30 odd years or so, Gibraltar's economy was very largely driven by the MOD, by the naval base, the dockyard, and everything that was associated with that, and the resident battalions, etc., etc. And sadly, I think today, not the economy I'm talking about now, sadly, the military presence is not as great. In fact, it's very, very much smaller. Gone are the days when we saw, for example, large numbers of Royal Navy warships passing through the naval base. And I can recall visiting Gibraltar, I think in the mid-80s, with a single task group. We were on our way into the Mediterranean, a single task group of some 20 ships. Now, the Navy would be hard-pressed to muster that lot today. And the number of people in the Navy is just about the same as the population of Gibraltar. So I don't think we see the same sort of presence in Gib that we used to do some years ago. It was very, very good to see in recent years HMS Queen Elizabeth visit Gibraltar, which is hugely symbolic and a significant event. And it reaffirmed the British sovereignty over the rock. And that is very important indeed. So if I may just touch on one or two current issues at the moment. Brexit, EU exit has caused much anxiety, of course it has, in Gibraltar. 96% of Gibraltarians voted to remain, as we know, and that vote, the referendum vote, was brought in very, very rapidly indeed. And I think Spain undoubtedly, in the initial stages at least, viewed Brexit as a once in a generation opportunity to regain ground in a dispute that's been festering for well over 3 centuries. And at the time, Spain somehow managed to persuade the EU to include a final clause in its negotiating protocol, the infamous clause 24, which stated effectively that nothing negotiated by the United Kingdom in terms of its own exit from the EU shall apply to Gibraltar unless agreed by Spain, which kind of gave Spain a say and a veto in affairs. It hasn't turned out quite as badly as that, and I'm touching wood as I speak, because right at the last breath, the 11th hour on New Year's Eve, there was an agreement, a breakthrough to agree a framework for talks, to talk about a framework for talks, and to reach an agreement by June of this year, 2021. I think the talks are just about beginning to get traction now, as far as I understand. There have been delays, not least caused by the pandemic, of course. And June the 21st, I think, in my personal view, it's a challenging date, but I'm sure everyone will work towards that. One of the big issues, I think, for Gibraltar is how the customs arrangements will work. There's an agreement that a concept that the European Union Border and Coast Guard Agency, Frontex, will man the border, if you like, and in the airport. And of course, Spain wants not the Guardia Civil to be there, and it is an absolute red line for Gibraltar and the United Kingdom that there should be no Spanish boots in Gibraltar in that sense. So that is still to be negotiated. And the whole agreement, if an agreement is made by June the 21st, will be reviewed in 4 years after that. And so there's still plenty, I think, to discuss and talk about. What's happening at the moment there, I gather, and there may be more people on this call who know more about the day-to-day in Gibraltar than I do, certainly. But I think I get the sense that people are fairly well hunkered down in Gibraltar at the moment, and that the whole COVID, the pandemic, has hidden the impact of EU exit and the possibilities of difficulties at the border, because people simply aren't traveling in the way that they used to. Spain could impose serious border checks at the drop of a hat. I think my understanding is the border is moving quite freely at the moment, or reasonably freely anyway. And of course, there is a socialist government in Madrid who are less inclined to punish their own workers in terms of making life difficult across that border. I think there are a few nervous things for the United Kingdom. The talks with Gibraltar are really designed to generate some sort of agreement around a Schengen-like area, i.e. some form of free movement across. But for the UK, I would say that that probably is a sensitive area because they don't want it to be a Schengen area per se, because it kind of feels they're leaving something in the European Union. And I think Boris Johnson's government did again that. And of course, the sensitivities about from the MOD about defence, and Spain has always been interested, I think, in the defence capability that Gibraltar offers. So these are all the things that are in the air at the moment, I think. Turning to the pandemic itself, I think Gibraltar has been a signal success in the way that things have happened. And I say that against the tragic background of the loss of 94 lives there, some 80 odd, I think, directly due to COVID. And of course, they started off with a very, very low levels, but then the elderly care area was hit over the sort of late autumn, Christmas time. And a majority of deaths, I think, happened around that sort of time. But right now, I believe that they've completed about 250,000 tests. Everybody who wants the jab has been jabbed twice in Gibraltar. About 1 in 10, I think, have declined the offer of a vaccination. But those that have been vaccinated include some 3,000 cross-border workers. And so, they keep the economy going and whatever. I think the Gibraltar economy is surviving this. There was a sovereign loan through the UK, and it will begin to pick up again, but probably not, I would guess, until Spain has normalized as well. For example, cross-border movement is quite limited at the moment. There are no day trippers, there's no holiday makers coming in, etc., etc. So I think it will depend on what happens in Spain to the speed of the pickup of the economy in Gib. Right, that's probably all you need to hear from me. What I want to do now is just run through, just for light entertainment purposes, some photographs, and just I'll talk loosely to them. So Lucia, if we could have the first one up, that would be brilliant.
I'll put myself off mute, Adrian, if you need to speak to me.
Yeah.
Just quickly share my screen.
Okay.
Just getting there, and there we go.
Lovely. Well, that's the scene you're seeing behind my head, in fact. And that's a lovely aerial view of Gibraltar. And I think the thing I would pick out for this photograph in particular is the amount of reclamation that's been made in the harbour and on the west side of the rock. And I can remember a day, and there'll be others who remember much more than me, when you could walk along Line Wall Road and you were pretty much down, you could put your feet in the water almost. And HMS Rook, which is kind of in the centre there now, was right on the waterfront. So things have changed quite markedly, I think, and it's a very interesting development. Right, next photograph, please. I like this shot particularly. First of all, it shows what an absolutely unusual geological feature Gibraltar is. It shows the rock in stark contrast there. And what we're looking at, of course, is early Jurassic limestone, about 200 million years old. Though actually the rock itself, the shape of the rock is much, much younger than that, about 5 million years. And I'm treading well out of my depth here, but this is when the two great tectonic, the European and African plates, met and pushed up, and Gibraltar the rock is a remnant of that, and pushed this Jurassic limestone up into this absolutely unique shape. If you look in the distance beyond the rock, you will see Jebel Musa, which is in Morocco. And Jebel Tariq, which was Gibraltar, and Jebel Musa were the Pillars of Hercules. And the strait runs between the pillars, the gate. And I think the other thing that this photograph shows really interestingly, for those who don't know Gibraltar, is the airport, the runway, which ain't very long, I can tell you that from personal experience, and has this wonderful Winston Churchill Road running straight through the middle of it. So whenever a plane takes off or lands, the road is closed, and it's quite interesting. And I can tell you from personal experience that flying in the vicinity of the rock, there is some amazing turbulence and unusual effects. And anybody who's flown in and out of in EasyJet or British Airways will understand what I'm talking about. Next slide, please. This was our arrival. I mentioned, coming in on board at HMS Lancaster, and this was the whole feel for the day. I mean, it was just the most amazing experience. That's my wife, Susie, and I being met by the Chief Minister, Peter Caruana, and his wife, Christina. Next slide, please. And these are the keys of Gibraltar. And the governor doesn't salute. The governor holds the keys up to provide reassurance to the citizens of Gibraltar that the citadel is safe. The keys, I weighed them once, weigh 5 kilograms. And holding them up at that angle for the full national anthem is a fair feat. And I have to say that I had to do some repair damage to my rotator cuff muscles after all of that. Next slide, please. And that masks the look of anguish on my face as I'm still holding the keys up. Next slide, please. Governor's Residence is a wonderful place called the Convent. It was in fact a Franciscan monastery built in the early 1500s. What we're looking at there is the modern part. That's a Victorian west wing, which were our personal quarters. The main part of the old monastery is off to the right of the picture there, but beautiful grounds. It was a wonderful place to be, a huge privilege. And one of the things my wife and I were really, really keen to do was to get as many people in and through the convent and the garden as we possibly could. And we had some wonderful times with open days and Queen's birthday parties and goodness knows what else. But it certainly was a privilege. Even the ghosts didn't faze us too much. Next slide, please. This is the main banqueting hall. And one of the things I was unprepared for was the fact that governors must have a coat of arms. So I was invited to create my own coat of arms with the College of Arms. It's the cost of a small family car, but well worth having. And I was told that actually by one of the heralds that this is probably one of the greatest displays of heraldry covering 3 centuries outside the College of Arms itself. So quite an interesting place to be and look around and see who's been there before you. Next slide, please. The most significant year of my time was 2012, the Diamond Jubilee, and we had a royal visit, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, and it was a fantastic visit. It went really well. There was the most amazing outpouring of British nationalism in Gibraltar. I mean, crowds you've never seen before. The royal couple were absolutely fantastic. They dealt with the whole thing brilliantly well, and I think it went down extremely well indeed. You may not be able to read the words on the stone there, but they say that it's, in my own words, at this site, Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh stood during their visit in May of 1954, when the Royal Yacht Britannia took them through Gibraltar. Next slide, please. I mentioned Gibraltar's national and patriotism. There it is. There's the Queen and the Gibraltar flag cast onto the north face of the rock. The next slide, please. And there's a variation of that. And of course, this is facing into Spain. And for some reason, this really irritated the Spanish. And I can't think why. But 2012 was a fantastic year. There were 1 or 2 perks to being the governor. Next slide, please. I'm a younger brother of Trinity House, and Europa Point Light is the southernmost light that belongs to and is looked after by Trinity House. So I became the keeper of Europa Point Light, which meant absolutely nothing at all, except that I could show it off to visiting people, etc. And it's wonderful. Next slide, please. As often as not, that's how it looked, and not on the nice days. Next slide, please. And I was so lucky. If you are lucky and you're well behaved as governor, you get a police boat named after you, and that's the flagship of the Royal Gibraltar Police, the Sir Adrian Johns. And it was a wonder. I think I'm driving the boat there, in fact. It was just brilliant, and it's still there. And the final slide, please. Just to say that my wife, Susie, was the most fantastic support to me during my time as governor. She did so much work with the community and all the charities out there. And our two dear old dogs, sadly now departed, but were very much part of our life there and part of life in the convent. And for those eagle-eyed, will may see on the collars of the dogs the Royal Gibraltar Regiment colours, which I was Commander-in-Chief. Right, that's it. Lucia, if you'll put us back onto screen, that'll be brilliant. And I'm very happy to handle whatever comes this way now.
Wonderful.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Adrian. Sorry, Philip, over to you.
Yeah, no, it's just, yeah, thank you, Sir Adrian. And your talk actually brought back a lot of memories for myself, as I was in Gibraltar in August 2012. So seeing the Queen illuminated on the rock was, yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, there is an opportunity now to ask questions. So there should be the, Sir Adrian has kindly offered to answer a couple of questions. So if you want to raise your hand on Zoom, or if you're not able to do that, just yeah, pop. Oh, actually, I've seen your hand go up. So yeah, Nathan, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Sir Adrian. It's a pleasure to speak to you this evening. Now, as the UK government proceeds with its post-Brexit Global Britain project, what role do you see for Gibraltar and indeed the other British overseas territories in this initiative? Thank you.
In which initiative in particular, Nathan? Sorry.
Just the idea of Global Britain redefining Britain's place in the world in terms of foreign policy, projecting diplomatically, and how that expands into the wider British overseas territory, and perhaps even touching on the Commonwealth.
Yeah, I think there is no doubt that the latest defence review, and it was a defence review that was combined with, if you like, the Foreign Office had a big part of it. And so the tone has changed, hasn't it? We're talking now about influence, global projection, looking after British interests around the world. And, you know, I think the British overseas territories are, you know, very much part of that. Not to be looked after necessarily, they can look after themselves, but actually they're in key parts of the world. And particularly Gibraltar has always been in the strategic sort of axis between two great continents and two great seas, the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean. And in Nelson's day, of course, that was fundamentally important. Today, because of the way communications and global presence is conducted, physically it's not so key, but it's 1,000 miles closer to wherever the Navy in particular and the Britain wants to go than the UK. And I see certainly a role for Gibraltar, and a continuing role. And I do believe that this global footprint that's represented by the overseas territories is going to be very significant in the decade to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I think we've got another question from Nathan Fairley.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming tonight, Adrian. Just wanted to pick up on something you said. You mentioned that Gibraltar's very patriotic. I was just wondering why that is. Obviously, it's quite interesting in the aftermath of the Brexit referendum. You know, you see Scotland moving more towards independence, but Gibraltar stayed very much, you know, it still very much wants to remain in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it's not part of the UK, of course. It is an overseas territory, and you know, is virtually autonomous. So you know, they've I think Gibraltar have got themselves into, an excellent position as far as they're concerned. They can make ends meet with a vibrant economy, and have been. And we hope it comes back again. They rely on the United Kingdom for defence and all of those things that a small nation wouldn't be able to provide for itself. And they've always seen, I think, Britain as a protector. And ever since 1704 and the Anglo-Dutch Marines took Gibraltar, and the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, when Gibraltar was ceded by Spain, Spain has had aspirations for bringing Gibraltar back to the Spanish fold as they saw it. Their argument seems to hinge on the contiguous nature of the territory, which is, in my view, a nonsense. The United Kingdom's position is about self-determination of the people, and the people of Gibraltar want to remain British, and they see the British Crown as a protection and a cloak, I think. And I think the economy, the axis between the UK and Gibraltar has really strengthened through the EU exit process. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I've got a hand up from, forgive me for pronouncing your name wrong, Hadley. Over to you, Hadley.
Good afternoon from the Cayman Islands. My question is essentially, did you notice any particular difference in attitudes to Gibraltar from the Spanish government as it changed from PSOE to PP and back over the years?
Yes, I mean, and I've seen it from a distance, Hadley, because it was mostly Pepe while I was there. So it was quite difficult at times. In a way, we knew how Spain would react to these things, and it was often aggressively, often heatedly. And in fact, someone told me when I went to Gibraltar, he said, you'll find that the Foreign Office does things very, very differently from the way Spain conducts its business. The English play cricket and the Spain fights bulls. And I think that sort of sums it up rather. They sort of charge at everything. But of course, the PSOE, Andalusia is a strongly socialist area. And I think the PSOE, that's closer to their heart than certainly the Pepe. I think the Pepe were quite happy to let the people of La Linea, go to hell in a handcart if needed, all for the sake of Gibraltar, not conceding anything on Gibraltar at all. So I think Pedro Sanchez was very influential in Andalusia. He is now obviously the Prime Minister in Spain, and I think there is an overhang of that makes life more amenable now to serious discussion and getting a reasonable outcome to all of this. The worry, I think, is what happens in 4 years' time when the whole thing comes up for review again. If there's a different government in Spain, how will they react? Will they walk away from it and will they back to square one? Difficult questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Hadley. And obviously very topical time in the Cayman Islands. I believe you've just got a new premiere as of yesterday. So yes, it's been we've been watching what's going on in the Cayman Islands very closely the past week. I think we've now got a question from Robert Midgley.
Hi, Sir Adrian. Hope you're well this evening. So I don't have my camera on tonight. I do have a question actually. I've been reading about the deal that was agreed at the end of last year. I'm trying to get my head around the position of the Frontex border people, who I guess will be at the airports and the harbours. What do you see will happen go forwards? Do you see the elimination of the border completely, or do you think there will still be someone at the border? Do you think this will actually come into action, having Frontex patrol people at the airport and harbours?
Robert, thanks very much. I think customs is the biggest issue, and I think Frontex will be dealing with that. And I think I understand there's no difficulty with Gibraltar for them to do that. Spain obviously wants to get their oar in here and have a Spanish part of this, and that is where the red line is. So I think in the longer term, the UK and Gibraltar probably would have no difficulty with Frontex as a European Union organization providing some sort of, if you like, neutral interface at the border and customs and whatever. But it depends how that is thrashed out in the agreement. And again, it depends on how things look in 4 years' time, when things may have changed quite significantly.
Okay, thank you. We've had a question in the chat, Sir Adrian. Alan Massey asks, what was your most difficult episode? I think as in your time as governor, was there specific, what was your most difficult occasion?
I had two or three. I think I've alluded to one of them already, which is my falling out with the Minister for Europe. In fact, I got thrown out of his office.
Right. Is that the UK minister? Sorry, which?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that Alan? Alan Duncan?
No names, no factuals. You can probably work it out for yourself.
Oh, okay.
It was a completely different way of understanding the constitutional position of the governor. Let's put it like that. But that was in April of 2010, and May 2010 the government changed. And I remember going down the corridor to see the Director of Europe. I said, we might have a problem here. But my advice would be to hunker down for a month and wait to see what the election does. But I had said to my wife, actually, I had phoned back and said, don't unpack all the suitcases because we might be going. And there were one or two issues, particularly again with the waters, I think, where I felt that my position was being, as the governor, was being jeopardized by the way that things were being handled in London. And all I would say was that, I was quite prepared to resign and walk if needs be. It never came to that, but there were a couple of occasions where it got a bit tense.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Then we've got a question just from Tony Williams. Good to have you on the call this evening, Tony. Does Gibraltar have capacity to expand tourism, or are the numbers currently at the maximum?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, there is limited capacity, of course there is in Gibraltar, because it's such a small area, just 2.5 square miles. Much of the tourism depends on day tripping in from Spain every day. And of course, you can take all sorts of numbers there. And the cruise ships, when they come, will land thousands of people. And it's often a question of just coordinating that to make sure there aren't, 6,000 to 8,000 people going down, trying to get down Main Street as opposed to 3,000. But there are others listening tonight who may have a better answer to that in terms of actual capacity. So I'll leave it there. I don't know if anyone else wants to pitch in on that one.
That's fine. Thank you. And we've just also got a question. I think we'll just take one or two more before we start to conclude. From Oliver Wilderspin. Oliver.
Hi, Sir Adrian. You mentioned the advice you got from a friend who was Lieutenant Governor of Guernsey. I'm from Jersey, so we've got a similar situation here with our Lieutenant Governor. So which part of the job did you enjoy the most? Was it the ribbon cutting, the meeting people, the sort of ceremonial role, like a member of the royal family would have, or was it the more political side, interacting with the Foreign Office, with the local government, in the thick of it, sort of there?
First of all, because I was in the Navy, the whole ceremonial representational thing just came very easily. So, I mean, I enjoyed doing that. It was a very pleasant duty. I can't say that I enjoyed the political interactions, if you like, but they were very stimulating and they were challenging. And I look back at it and I think, well, I enjoyed that in a perverse sort of way. I mean, it was quite tense at the time on occasions. The thing I enjoyed most, the thing I really enjoyed most was the people, was meeting the people, and the relationship. It was warm, it was welcoming. it was fantastic, and we made, I think, friends for life. And certainly the whole experience, I think, changed my and my wife's lives completely. It was a brilliant experience altogether, made by the people of Gibraltar, in my view.
Okay.
Thank you.
Laura, Laura has a question. Do you want to take yourself off mute, Laura?
Hello?
Hello, yes, go ahead.
Hello, thank you very much. I am Laura Panades. I am Spaniard, but working in the Cayman Islands right now. So I have a double interest in the conversation here. My question concerns the way that the British Overseas Territories interact with the UK. So far, all queries are transferred via the FCO desk. Now, if I understood you correctly, Adrian, you have said that the FCO desk response tends to be rather slow. This also echoes the claims of especially a group of academics and people related to the FCO, which in 2018-2019, in the Future Territories inquiry, also denounced that the FCO desk response is rather slow and that perhaps other models would have to be looked at. So, John, like in your personal capacity, which kind of model of communication between British Overseas Territories and the Crown would you advocate for? Thank you.
Laura, thank you very much. I was really talking about my perception of my time in the procedure for making protests through the Foreign Office. But I think Gibraltar stands in a very, very different position from all the other overseas territories, because Gibraltar was, and I think still is, part of the Europe department as opposed to the Overseas Territories department. And it was because of the European Union, of course, and still will be, I think. So the way we dealt with issues, I think, was very, very different from the way the rest of the overseas territories dealt. We dealt through a completely different set of people, the Europe department, the Iberia desks, etc., etc. And frankly, I think, it was very easy to make a glib criticism about being slow, but the Foreign Office was a very frustrating institution at times. But actually, I worked with some really capable people there, intelligent, capable people. And that was very encouraging indeed. It just became rather irritating at a time when the institution itself seemed to be slow and ponderous and process driven.
Yeah, well, just the last question, Adrian, is from John. John asks, do you think UK financial support to Gibraltar is appropriate, bearing in mind our overseas development budgets?
To be honest, John, I don't know what financial support is being provided at the moment, except for a sovereign loan, which is obviously going to be paid back. And certainly during my time, there was virtually no money coming across from the United Kingdom into Gibraltar. Now, things have changed because of EU exit and all the rest of it, and I don't have the figures. I don't know what the answer is. I'm simply aware that certain agreements have been made. A sovereign loan has been made. I think it's cost sharing on the ferry that comes across from Algeciras to bring goods across that have come down from the UK through Spain. But as far as I'm aware, there is absolutely no direct financial support as such.
Okay, thank you. And I just on that note, that concludes the question side. I do want to just briefly, it's a pleasure to have one of our trustees and somebody I think you're well known to you, Sir Adrian. Albert's on the line, Albert Poggio. Good evening, Albert. I don't know if you can hear me, Albert, but if you're there, we're good to have you.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Albert. Hello. Good evening.
Hi. Good evening, everyone.
I must say hello.
May I, Adrian, on behalf of the Hot Pot, as one of the trustees of Hot Pot, thank you for giving us your time, and thank you for this very excellent talk that you've us. As most of you know, I was the UK representative 28 years in London, and through my office, I've served many governors. So Adrian was one of those that endeared himself to the people of Gibraltar very, he's still there today. He has not given up on Gibraltar, as he's proven this evening by his talk. He's also the chairman of the Friends of Gibraltar, of which I'm privileged to be the vice with Sir Adrian. And Adrian, by no means an embarrassment, but I think the first time I ever met you, it was the then cat of HMS Ocean, or was it Invisible? I can't quite remember that.
Ocean.
And you called on Gibraltar, Ocean, and I was invited, privileged to be invited to a reception on board, which is when I first met you. And you, HMS Ocean had on board a company of commandos or Royal Marines who were doing an exercise the following morning to the reception, and then of course they approached the wrong beach. In fact, they landed in Spain, and it made world news. And I just imagine what you must have felt as of Ocean when you told Marines landing in Spain. Can you tell us what your thoughts were at the time?
Albert, I'm so grateful that you brought that point up. Thank you very much indeed. It was it was an awful weekend. It was the worst weekend I've ever spent in Gibraltar, I have to say. And there were a couple of reasons for that. First of all, we arrived quite late on a Friday afternoon, and we had some work to do to get our landing craft swapped over from side to side. Well, first of all, one of the landing craft broke down in the water, and we had to get it towed back to the ship. We only had one engine anyway in Ocean, because the other one was packed up and waiting for repair alongside. The weather was turning very bad. It was getting dark. And so we ended up going in the dark with a real wind blowing. The pilot came on board. He looked about 13 years old to me, said that his last job was a river pilot on the Hamble, and this was the first big ship he'd ever handled himself in Gibraltar. So we got alongside. And on the day in question, we were going to do an amphibious rehearsal on the east side, on the beaches there. Long beaches, absolutely fantastic place to do it. The weather was so bad, they had to change and do the western beaches, which is very narrow, as you know. And the coxswain of the boat that took the Royal Marines away told me afterwards, he said, well, he came round the corner, he knew exactly where he was going, but there appeared to be an angling competition on the beach. So he jinked 11 meters left and ended up on the Spanish side of the border. Of course, all the protests happened, and it was probably the tensest 24 hours I spent in HMS Ocean. And interestingly, it didn't cause a major diplomatic glitch, because there was a little bit of tit for tat going on somewhere, which I never got to the bottom of. But Spain said, okay, it was an honest mistake, and nothing was intended by it. So there we are. And I didn't, by the way, I didn't mention that when I went in for my interview in the Foreign Office.
Fantastic story. I'm glad. Thank you for raising that, Albert. And yeah, no. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude the proceedings tonight. A huge thanks to you, Sir Adrian. It's been wonderful to hear from you, and yeah, it's been fascinating. And yes, Gibraltar is geographically our closest overseas territory, but it's a special place, and it's somewhere that we're very proud to visit every year. And we're looking forward to attending National Day, as we do every year, Sir Adrian, which you'll know is a great time to visit the Rock. But yes, so ladies and gentlemen, and just a few, I think, Lucia, do you have a few announcements to make before we wrap up?
Yep, of course. Firstly, thank you very much, Adrian. It was a very interesting evening. Just in terms of events for everyone to be aware of that are coming up, in 2 weeks' time, we have on the 5th of May a special webinar commemorating St. Helena and the bicentenary of Napoleon's death. So we've got an interesting panel lined up for that evening, so do please sign up if any of you are interested in attending. And on the 13th of July, we have, fingers crossed, our first physical event for the last 18 months, which is a summer barbecue in London. So we hope to see as many of you there. Again, please do sign up if you're interested. I'll circulate the link in the chat bar, and we will have it on the usual Ticket Tailor websites and Facebook.
Yeah, and I think you've got, is it a call tomorrow this year with the Friends of Gibraltar? Is that?
I do, yes, indeed.
So
just to get that ready,
yeah.
yes.
Well, I'm sure Albert and Sir Adrian will be interested in how that goes. So yes, we've got a barbecue. We're hoping to yes, have a barbecue. We did it 2 years ago, and we're fingers crossed we'll be able to see you all face to face in a few months' time. And we've also looking at doing a Cayman themed event in June, following the very interesting past week where they've just appointed a new premier. But it's yes, it's like lots of coalition discussions going on. But yes, we'll be in touch on that. If does anyone else have any words they wish to mention before I finish? No? Okay, we'll just yeah, thank you everyone again. Have a lovely evening, and we look forward to hopefully welcoming you all to our St. Helena event in 2 weeks. And yeah, please keep safe, and God bless. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Thanks.